Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for participating in today's Facebook Live event. My name is Karin England. I'm a landscape architect and park planner with Metro Vancouver Regional Parks, and I'm your host for today. I'm here today to share sustainable gardening practices and talk about the Grow Green Guide, which is a collaborative tool developed by Metro Vancouver together with the UBC Botanical Garden to encourage sustainable gardening for residents in the Metro Vancouver area. We acknowledge that Metro Vancouver residents live, work, and recreate on the shared territories of many Indigenous peoples, including 10 local First Nations, who are the Katzie, Kwantlen, Kwikwetlam, Matsqui, Musqueam, Kikite, Semiahmoo, Squamish, Swasan, and Tsleil-Waututh. I am personally grateful for the example they give for caring for community members, taking care of the land and the water, and living a life in deep connection with nature. Today is already the fifth of a six-part 2024 live stream gardening series. You can follow us on Facebook. You can check out the Metro Vancouver events calendar to learn more about upcoming segments. Today, we're going to be talking about Waterwise gardening. With all the hot and dry weather we're experiencing, we wanted to focus on how to be more water-wise in our gardening. And we have no one better to talk about the topic today than Egan Davis, who is the Parks Operation Manager at the City of Richmond, and he's been our guest before. Welcome, Egan.
Thank you, Karin. Wow, what a pleasure to be here. And hello to everybody out there watching. This is fun.
It's been a little while. The last time we spoke with you, you were still at the UBC Botanical Garden, and you've since moved on to the City of Richmond. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing at the City of Richmond Parks?
Yeah, absolutely. My background, the only industry I've ever worked in, ever had a job in is parks, horticulture, urban forestry, and that's like landscape, residential landscape maintenance and construction. I've spent a long time in my career working in different botanical gardens, and have a passion for plants, have always had a passion for plants, and that's what's made my career so always compelling for me. Now here at the City of Richmond, in local government, it's a terrific opportunity for me to work with a large team to have an impact on how people experience the natural areas and parks in our cities. In parks operations, my team includes the horticulture group, who plant all of the display medians that we're well known for and work in all of the parks and all of the garden bed areas, and urban forestry, manage the inventory of trees, and then the turf maintenance group, which includes some of the passive areas, the long grass management areas, and the sports fields.
I really appreciate when I drive through Richmond, when I go to Richmond, just how beautifully green the city is and how beautiful the maintenance is out there. So thank you for that. I find it a real pleasure to come visit your city, largely because, I'm focused on the horticulture also, so
Yeah,
largely because it's just so green and beautiful.
thanks.
We are currently in water restriction phase 1, and I just thought I'd go over quickly what the protocols are for that. You're allowed to water your lawn once a week, first thing in the morning. On Saturdays, if you're an even-numbered address, and on Sundays, if you're an odd-numbered address. Watering trees, shrubs, and flowers is permitted any day from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. if you're using a sprinkler, or you can water at any time. If you're hand watering or using drip irrigation, hoses have to have an automatic shut-off device, which means that if you let go of the trigger, the water stops coming out. And that's just to keep people from over-watering their lawns or starting to water and then forgetting they had the water on, going inside and coming out an hour later and saying, oh oh crap, I left the water on for a whole hour. So that's what that's about. And it's important, I think, to highlight that if you're gardening for food gardening, edible plants are exempt from restrictions. So you're allowed to water at any time the things that you plan on eating. All of this is in place because we know that in the summer months, our watering increases significantly. Our water use shoots way up in the summer, mostly because of lawn watering and outdoor uses. So Egan, do you have any tips for our audience on how to best manage our lawns with less water, to reduce our water use?
Well, that's a great question. I think the first thing with lawns is to, to try to understand how we got to where we are with residential lawns. Um, in the mid 20th century, there's the a lot of families, a lot of single family residential homes, rising economy, and there's this sort of aesthetic and lifestyle that went along with it. It was the 2-car garage with the big lawn out front and the backyard with the patio and the barbecue, and so that's kind of the the that's what we accept as our expectation for a residential property and grass on a residential property. And I think it's the biggest opportunity is to try to reimagine those expectations. And so, there's a lot of alternatives for turf grass for one, but it is true that like grass surface is a durable surface that you can walk on and sit on and play on and dogs can run on. And so not saying that there isn't value there, but the grasses that we have in lawns, in residential lawns, they're cool season plants that naturally will be green and vegetative in the spring and a little bit in the late summer, early fall, and they will grow vegetatively then and be green. And then towards as summer progresses, the onset of summer, the vegetative component of the plant goes dormant. This is the natural life cycle. The plant will produce a flower and set seed, and then grow vegetatively again in the fall. And so, knowing that and understanding that it is a natural part of a cool season grass plant's life cycle to go dormant. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's just reimagining the green lawn in July and August. It's not necessary. And so if you have a lawn, and then people say, well, they let their lawn go brown, and I don't like that word. Actually, somebody gave me a piece of advice once when I was talking about plants. I was designing a garden, and I said, oh, it's really great. It's an interesting plant. It has brown leaves, and this other one has yellow leaves. And feedback said, I used to be in sales, and you shouldn't say brown. You should say bronze, and you should say gold, right? And so let the lawn go bronze and golden in the summertime, and it's totally acceptable. So that's one strategy. If you are irrigating your lawn, I think that side of growing grass, it's astonishing if you have an irrigation system, and this is whether it's your lawn or your garden. It can be astonishing how much water irrigation systems use if you're not really carefully programming them. So one way to save water there is to really thoughtfully program your irrigation system so that you're delivering just the right amount of water. If you deliver too much water to grass, a lot of it just pours right into, through the soil profile, through the root zone, and is wasted. And, it can cause nutrients to leach. And so it's important to make sure that the intervals, like how often through the week that you're programming your irrigation system, and for the duration, for how long. And if you're running an irrigation system for 45 minutes 3 times a week, that's an astonishing amount of water. So a good tip actually is to run your irrigation system and just put out a container and run it for a period of time, measure how much water collects in that container, and understand that a good baseline for watering lawns. If your irrigating lawns is an inch a week, delivered over shorter intervals. So what that would mean is the whole week you put down an inch of water, and maybe you'll do 2 intervals, so that would be half an inch each time. And so if you do the work, you measure how much water the irrigation system's delivering, you can then calculate for how long you need to run the system for. And if you don't do that work, you end up wasting a ton of water, and that's not, in terms of our water supply, that's bad. And it's counterproductive if you're you know if you're irrigating your grass to improve its growth. Too much water actually is not a good thing. So that's a really important part. But my first suggestion would, for a residential lawn, is just let it go bronze.
Yeah, I say let your lawn get a tan in the summer.
I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that.
I don't know if we're encouraging people to get a tan anymore. I don't know if that's a thing that we do anymore, but yeah, bronze, that's true. It's all in the words you use, isn't it? Same as
Yeah, maybe.
Look the same. It's how you sell it.
Or caramel.
There was a local municipality that had an ugly lawn competition last summer. I believe it was last summer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that really took off, and the residents of the municipality seemed to really be engaged in that. And
yeah, and I mean, that's super fun, and I would actually take that a step further, and again, maybe try to see beauty in that too, because I think a lawn that has gone dormant isn't necessary. I mean, we do like the color green, and when you think of landscape, green is the first color that comes to mind, and then there's flowers. But in the summertime, those sort of golds, bronzes, tan colors, those are natural and beautiful as well.
And they look so beautiful with some of the plants that are blooming at that time of year.
Oh, yeah.
Yarrows, Gaillardia, just is a stunning palette. I think that some of the work that you're doing at Richmond involves managing turf as long grass meadows. Am I right about that?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you mentioned yarrow and Gaillardia, because so I just mentioned that grass is a cool season plant. It grows vegetatively in the spring and goes dormant in the summertime. And what's really fun is to think of what warm season plants can then occupy and grow in that window when the grass isn't, and it's not competing with the dormant grass. And yarrow, and I have spent times on my hands and knees weeding yarrow out of grass. But yarrow will grow into grass, and in the spring the grass is green. But if it goes dormant, it doesn't have to be long. You can cut it in, around now when the lawns are starting to bronze out. You cut the grass. If there's yarrow in there, then what will happen is the yarrow will flower, and you've got this lovely crop of flowers over your dormant lawn. And at Garry Point Park in Richmond, and you have to come see it because it's starting to happen now. There is that park is all these sand dunes with grass, but because grass doesn't grow very thick in sand, and there's all these patches. In the patches in the summer when the grass is dormant, Gaillardia, which is native to this region, and it grows and flowers, and it looks so gorgeous. There's this one contour where on the side where on the west and southern exposed side where the wind hits it, the Gaillardia doesn't grow, but along the leeward side where in the wind shadow, that's where all the Gaillardia flowers mostly. So it's a little bit on the front and a lot on the back, and it's so pretty because the pattern is kind of an expression. It illustrates the pattern of wind and the contours. Anyways, I digress because that maybe is a bit esoteric, but it's really beautiful. And in terms of what you can do with grass, I think it's it's sort of reimagining what the possibilities are.
Right. I think that's an example of the right plant in the right place. Nature is, obviously nature is the best plant. If it's not going to grow there with the conditions that are there, the plant won't grow there. And just to see that expressed through the plants that are growing at the park, I think that's, nature's our best teacher. So would you suggest that people introduce some native flowering plants into their lawn, and how would they go about that if they wanted to do it?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So when it comes, there's a couple ways you can introduce. There's a few ways you can introduce native plants and broadleaf flowering plants into a lawn. Um, you can use seed, which is the easiest and least expensive. So if you have a very dense lawn, seed needs bare soil to germinate, right? So if you have a very thin lawn, rather than trying to understand how I can thicken this up, I think looking at those patches. And actually, here's a fun thing to think about. Chafer beetle is a regional pest, a European chafer beetle, and at certain times of the year, crows and raccoons and skunks will dig up the grass to eat the grubs. And then everybody's wondering, well, how can I fix the grass? Well, I look at that and I think, wow, what a great opportunity. Now you've got all this bare soil. Throw some seed down, throw some yarrow seed down. It depends on you know, what the context is, but lupins would grow in that, chamomile, that kind of thing. And so seed can be great, and you need that disturbance. So seeding's one thing that you can do. We've actually been planting a lot of bulbs in some of our long grass management areas, and so we planted thousands of daffodils and camassia down our railway greenway. Actually, I'm not sure. I had some pictures. Picture number one, I think, illustrates that. If we can bring that up, I'm not sure if that's easy to do right now. But anyhow, we planted clumps. There you go. Yeah, you can see the blue pockets there that are popping through the long grass. That's like late May into the beginning of. This is actually into June. And so that grass hasn't been cut. It still hasn't been cut. And actually in the foreground, you can see along the edge, that's yarrow growing. We had a mow strip just to, keep the grass off the pathway and provide a bit of legibility and intention. And in that mow strip, yarrow is growing. And now within that whole area, the camassia is finished flowering. And there are other broadleaf plants. There's lupins growing in there. There's vetch growing in there, and there's yarrow. And a lot of those plants actually tend to be growing in the very sort of the more rocky areas. It's kind of a funny thing if you're trying to grow plants in your grass. The more nutrient rich, like a high resource scenario with like water and soil, will stimulate grass, and grass will outcompete everything. But if you want to do this, you need a low resource scenario. So less water, less nutrition. Quite frankly, if you were growing grass on a bed of gravel and sand, you'd have more success growing the broadleaf flowering plants. And so anyhow, so there's planting bulbs, and then the other thing that you can do is you can plug plants in, and that's maybe a little more labor intensive. But actually, if you can pop up number three, the picture three, if that's possible. There's an image there that actually shows here where the grass is not growing so vigorously because the soil is quite lean. And look at all the broadleaf flowering plants and that hasn't been mowed. That's like, I think that picture is from like the middle of July. And so that's grass. That was, at one point grass that we were cutting weekly. And now we're just cutting it once a year. We're letting it go through its cycle and then hay cropping it at the end of the year. And
So
yeah.
when you say hay cropping, for the people that aren't familiar with that term, what does that mean?
Oh, I mean, hay cropping is, if you think about like an agricultural crop, it grows, and then at the peak of growth, whether it's for the seeds or for the vegetative, that come in and cut it down. I will admit that when you let your grass grow long, it can be challenging to cut it down, but there are tools that you can use to cut down long grass. But the thing is that you're only cutting the grass, say, once, twice, or three times a year max, right? So that's really fun. And I love this image. This is Alexandra Park in Richmond. And this, to me, illustrates this park that we're looking at here. This illustrates a reimagining of what parks could look like. So there's a large open grass area, and there are a lot of broadleaf flowering plants. There's lupins and there's yarrow. There are a number of different things that are popping up through here, and it's really quite interesting because the same seed mix was broadcast over the whole site,
Hmm.
but because there's contours, those contours, just like at Gary Point, different things are growing at different elevations and different niches, and so there's these patterns that kind of illustrate the contours. So anyhow, I mean, I think that's really beautiful, and yet that is a departure from the that really closely cut, weekly cut, green lawn. And there's a place for everything, right? So you have sports fields, and those are managed specifically, and you have large passive areas where people want to throw a frisbee, and in parks we manage these spaces, and but at your residential home, you may want areas where there's short grass where you can sit and walk, and I think there's a lot of value in that. But what can be detrimental is when you're wasting resources, right? So depending on what your goals are, um, I think you always have an opportunity to um, be resourceful and not to waste resources. So even on the sports fields, like we manage sports fields, but we water carefully. We don't want to overwater the grass because that will make the grass grow soft and lush, and it'll burn out in the heat. It'll force the nutrition through the soil, and it'll leach. So it's carefully timed so that the water only deliver as much water as the plant needs and no more, right? So there's a science to it, right?
Speaking of not wasting anything, and being responsible with your resources, um, when you mulch, or if you do mulch, what materials do you use at the city? Why would you mulch? I guess I should have started with that. Why would you mulch, and what do you use for mulch?
um, yeah, actually. So why do you mulch? Am I allowed to quote Seinfeld here? Because there is a Seinfeld
Oh,
episode
I
where
don't know it.
where Kramer in the hallway starts a patio in a garden, and Jerry comes out and he's like, "You gotta mulch, Jerry. You gotta mulch." And I don't know. I thought that was funny, but it's true. I think you know mulch there's a lot of benefits to mulch. And when you think about anywhere where there's plants, there's always a crust on the soil. There's never bare exposed soil. Even when you see, say, a desert and you think, well, there's bare exposed sand there, it's not true. There's a layer of sand that has, fungal mycelium encrusted into it, and rock on top of that. And there's always, like in landscape, we always have, a topsoil layer that might be 15 centimeters, might be 30 centimeters, might be deeper than that, and then plants, and then with nothing on top, you're going to have weeds. The sun's going to bake out the soil and it'll dry faster. When it rains, rainwater will hit that soil, damage its structure, and that will in turn inhibit the ability for the rain to actually go deeply into the soil. So mulch can be anything. It can be organic materials like I think the best thing is cycling what you recycling products that you have in the landscape. So leaves are the best if you've got trees, and leaves from trees, naturally in a forest, land on the ground, and they outcompete weeds, which limits competition for the plants underneath. So there's like a strategy there, and then they break down and decompose, and there's nutrients that the plant draws up from the soil, and those nutrients manifest into organic materials, and those organic materials eventually will decay or fall off the tree in the case of leaves, land on the soil, and there'll be decomposition, and those nutrients will then become available to the plant again. There's a cycle there, right? And through that cycle you have weed suppression, you have moisture retention. Mulch will allow, when rain hits, uh, a surface where there's a cover of what we in garden landscape and horticulture call mulch, it'll hit that product, it'll absorb it like a sponge, and then the water will slowly weep into the soil, and that will enable the water to enter slowly and go deeply, as opposed to puddling and running off the surface and not entering properly. So I guess your question is, what do we use at the City of Richmond? And like, yeah, we try to we employ circular economy principles, and so we try to, reuse products. So urban forestry, we're pruning trees and chipping the branches, and then those wood chips, that arbor chip, that's a great mulch product, great weed suppression, decomposes slowly, but it does. And then, you add these products. If you go into a natural forest and you peel the surface away, the litter, you'll see leaves. You'll peel that away, and then you'll see, shredded leaves that are darkened in color, but you can still tell they're leaves. And then you peel that away. You can literally go through the last 3-4 years of litter fall, and eventually you start seeing shredded particles that don't really look like leaves. And then underneath that is a humus layer, which is decomposed organic matter. And you see a lot of feeding roots there. That's where a lot of nutrition cycling happens. And then worms, insects that burrow, animals that burrow will tunnel up in and out of that and then pull that material down into the topsoil. So what I'm describing here is a very complex zone where there's a lot of activity and a lot of benefits. And so, if you add leaves every year and you allow that slow decomposition, you build that transition, you get all those benefits. So every millimeter of that surface, there's something different happening. It's all beneficial to plants. Could go on and on and on about those benefits, but it's really, really true. In horticulture, we typically will add a layer of mulch and then a layer of topsoil, and that's better than nothing. But when you can, if you're really doing it well, you're building that really complex transition of materials, and then you get all those different activities happening. And yeah, that's really a great thing. That's where I have accomplished that in my background. In gardens that I've worked at, those gardens are very, very, they're low maintenance. There's very little, if any, weeding. There's less watering that's necessary. When you do water, the water goes deeper into the soils. And so there's a lot of benefits. You can use even rock is on the surface of, you'll see natural plant communities that have, like gravel type rocks on the surface of soil. And there's benefits there as well. Like that'll heat up the soil underneath. That'll actually also, though, maintain moisture, prevent, other competitive plants from out competing what's there, i.e. weeds. So lots of products. There's also some heavily processed products. I mean, I would avoid things with dyes in them. If you see something that's a bright red color in a bag, it might have some dye in it. I don't know what that is. And then there's like the whole, like, what kind of manure is best? Like, sheep manure, cow manure, steer manure, chicken manure. And all of these products, like manures, have salts in them. So, something that's decomposed is good. And, the short-term benefits of one manure over another, you could talk about that, but the long-term benefits are the same. So compost, manure, leaves, wood chips, it's all good stuff. Rock. Depends on the aesthetic, depends on what you're trying to do, depends on what you've got.
Yeah. Also, Metro Vancouver has a display at the P&E every year. And I like to put composted bark mulch, cedar or hemp for bark mulch in, because it makes the whole space smell fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to make your urban garden feel more foresty and natural, there's other ecological benefits also, but also sensory benefits for humans also, I believe, in addition to all the good things that mulch does.
You know how smells trigger memories? When you say that, for me, I fell in love with landscaping more than 30 years ago as a teenager, working in the summers and spreading bark mulch. I love doing it. Like I was put on this earth to do that work. And then now I'm in an office, but I guess my body's older, but that smell just reminds me of those good days moving big piles of mulch.
Yeah,
Give me a 30-yard pile and a wheelbarrow and a shovel,
If that smell can make that job enjoyable, that says something, right? That hard labor becomes fun work. Maybe that's just the way you are anyway, Egan. Perhaps that's true. So we talked about what makes good mulch, but would you be willing to share what you think the most efficient watering equipment is, as far as delivery methods. What's kind of sprinklers do you like, or hoses, or cans for watering? Do you have a preferred method of delivering the water?
Yes, I would say the most effective way to deliver water is with drip tubing. And, good drip tubing will have spring-loaded valves at the holes, not just pipe with holes. And when the water comes out, when the water stops flowing, it will prevent soil from entering back into the pipe. So you can get some really good drip tubing, and it's actually inexpensive. And the other thing about drip tubing is that it's low flow, so it'll deliver water slowly over a longer period of time. But because it doesn't, if you've got a hose bib, water will come out of that hose bib at a flow rate, and that flow rate might be able to run one sprinkler, and that can cover a certain sized area. But you can cover a larger area with drip tubing. Without having to move the sprinkler, you could actually use drip tubing because it's so efficient. So low flow is really great. And then because when water leaks onto soil, it enters the soil more effectively. And here's something for you to think about, actually. If you've got a 5-gallon pail, those plastic pails that paint comes in, for example, and you might buy them at the hardware store to move materials or whatever. But if you put a 5-gallon pail out on a really, really rainy day, even in the hardest rain that you've ever seen, it would take days for a 5-gallon pail to fill up with water, right? Days. Whereas if you've got a hose, you can fill up a 5-gallon pail in half a minute. And so that's important to understand, because even on the hardest raining days, soil has the ability to handle that much water, and that much water can enter the soil. But if you took a hose and just blasted the soil with it, it's going to make a puddle and run over the surface. And when you're delivering water, you want to water, like, soil has what we call an infiltration rate, right? And that there's a limit to that, i.e. there's a limit to how much water the soil can absorb. And if you exceed that limit, the water will just run over the surface. It'll destroy the structure, and you won't get that good infiltration. And so slow delivery is really good. A hose, if you're gonna hand water, and hand watering can be a fine way to do it too, but you just need to have a low flow nozzle to just slow down the amount of water that's coming out. And don't crank your hose. A low flow nozzle will still have a nice spray with the hose turned down, right? So you want a low flow nozzle, automatic shut off, like you'd mentioned, and move the sprinkler around so that it enters slowly. Because if you're standing there and holding the hose in one spot, the water will stop infiltrating. You'll start destroying the surface of the soil. So you got to, deliver it slowly. So I do like drip. Hand watering, there's an art to hand watering. If you want to, like I say, use a low flow nozzle, turn the water down, move the delivery around, and then literally just it's actually kind of pleasing to watch the water enter as you're watering another area, then bring it back and manage that, right? Other than that, sprinklers, if you're using sort of a more broad, like a broadcast sprinkler, sprinklers with large droplets are better than sprinklers that create a mist, because mist will there's less gravity with those mist droplets, and they'll blow away. And so there's a lot of water drift and waste. Micro drip irrigation systems are great. And the great thing too about micro drip or drip tubing is you can install that yourself on your hose bib outside. You don't need to tap into a hard connection with high pressure. You can use your hose bib, and it's easy. You don't need a plumber, right? So micro drip is really good, and micro drip are really fun because it's quarter-line tubing. It's not a lot of water, and there's all types of different nozzles, and you can be really targeted where you put the water, and there's less overspray and less drift. And it depends on what type of area you're watering. But even though those old school oscillating sprinklers, those aren't terrible as long as they're targeted. Like, it's terrible if you've got one and third of the water is going onto like a hard surface or a pathway. But if you've got a large area, big droplets, nice slow movement. So by the time, some droplets have fallen on an area and the sprinkler moves back and moves forward. By the time it gets back to where it started, everything there has infiltrated, and so it's a really good delivery. So that's the concept, is to understand large droplets so they don't blow around and drift, and then also a very slow delivery so you get good infiltration.
This is excellent advice. Thank you. Yeah, micro drip, something that you could do yourself at home, and it's not terribly expensive, and you don't need a plumber to help you with it.
Oh yeah, and I got a great story actually at the botanical garden, UBC Botanical Garden, which is I think where you and I met when I was working there. Um, in the food garden, students and I upgraded the irrigation system to micro drip, and it was so good because those nozzles were targeted. There wasn't any overspray, and then we were able to set it up so that we were able to deliver perfectly even water distribution. And it's awesome because then what you do, if you really want to take it all the way to the end, you put out we put out a number of cups, right? And it actually doesn't matter if the cups if the cups, it doesn't matter the size. You just basically put out cups and you put the sprinklers on for 15 minutes, half an hour, and then you measure how much water is delivered, like with literally with a ruler. Like you stick a ruler in and you say, okay, so in half an hour it was 1 centimeter. Let's just say that to make it easy. So that means in 1 hour you can deliver 2 centimeters of water, and then you can reference this. I know, West Coast Seeds has a really good resource in terms of what plants require what amount of water and how many centimeters or how many inches a week. And if something's got deep roots like pumpkins and tomatoes to some degree, you want to deliver the water less frequently and for a longer duration, so the water goes deep. And then don't water again for maybe only once a week, so that the surface dries and that forces the roots deep. But then things like lettuce and arugula, things that have shallow roots, if you waited a week, the roots are only in the top, say 4 inches, 10 centimeters, they'll dry out and the plants will suffer. So you want to water more often, but for a shorter period of time. And so a good baseline is an inch of water a week for herbaceous plants. So for food crops, that's a good place to start. Yeah. And then you can start there, and then see if the plants are looking like they're needing more or less water depending on the type of growth you get, and then you can dial it up and down. At least you've got a baseline, right? And at the botanical garden with that micro drip, we did all that. We measured it, and we knew exactly what the flow was. We knew exactly how much water we were delivering. We knew exactly how long to turn the sprinklers on for, and exactly how long to spread out the intervals. And like I said, it's a fun science. So anyways, fun stuff, and you can do all that with drip.
Right. Something that you could do yourself at home if you had the interest. It doesn't take a lot of fancy technology. You don't need to be a scientist to do it.
No, you don't. And I have noticed there are two types of people in this world: people who like that kind of thing, the sort of the technical side, and then people who don't seem to really, be that interested. But either way, I think it's important to have some sense of how much water you're putting down. Because if it's always interesting to me. It's like we need to use less water. And I think that's a great thing. But in order to understand what less is, I think you have to, there's an expression that can be measured can be improved, right? Like if you don't know where you're starting, how do you know if you're using less, right? So I think measuring the amount of water you're putting down is a really important thing, because then you know where you're at, and then you know when you're making changes that you're actually using less or more water, and then you can measure the effect that it has on your plants. And that's something that if you're growing food in like a community garden plot, or terrestrial situation at home, or even in a container, just measuring is important, because then if you water too much for those types of crops, they get lush, and the bush growth is more susceptible to stressors like insects and heat. Um, and so, just too dry and leaf quality is not good. Plants taste bitter. So you just want to hit the sweet spot. And if you're really, really good, that's like you want to adjust the dials up and down, right? And nail it. And so that's where measurement comes in.
What if you were talking about plants and how much water they need? What are some of the characteristics that low water use plants share? If you were going to go to the
Mm-hmm.
nursery and you were going to look for plants that are low water use, how do the plants tell you that they are low water use plants?
Oh, I love that question. I mean, one thing that I've always enjoyed in my life is to look at plants and understand, like they all have different shaped leaves and they all have different forms. And there's often this piece like, how did that, what's the adaptation strategy of that plant, right? And so, plants, you think about plants that grow in the shade, they need a large leaf surface to collect, light in a sort of darker area. And so inversely, plants that come from dry environments tend to have smaller leaves because they're out in the full sun. And not only do they, meet their light collection with a small leaf, but also large leaves will lose moisture, right? And so small leaves, often the leaf posture, like if a leaf is large and its sort of posture is horizontal, parallel to the ground, that's a posture that collects light. There's some really great Arctostaphylos from Western North America where the leaf posture is perpendicular to the ground, and that's a strategy to reduce the amount of light collection in a high light environment, and which would be dry as well. So small leaves, silver foliage plants, silver is often when plants have hairs on them or a powdery kind of bloom on the leaf. Those adaptation strategies are like sunscreen to reduce UV damage to leaf tissues. So silver leaves, also plants that aromatic oils like lavender, rosemary, thyme, all those plants. Those oils inhibit water loss through the leaf, but they also deter herbivory in a really dry environment. So if you go to Utah, for example, and you're looking in the sort of desert areas, you'll see scrubby plants and there's far apart, and there's not many, and life's tough for a plant, and life's tough for an animal. If you have a herbivore that's looking for food and you taste good and you live in that environment, I'd say you as a plant, but if a plant in that environment tastes good, it's not going to survive. And so that's where those sort of aromatic oils, they don't, they might taste good when they're chopped up into small pieces in a salad, but when you actually bite down, it's not good. So that's another neat thing is the sort of aromatic oils. And then deep roots, plants from dry environments have deep roots and often very thick roots. And I've noticed plants that come from really wet environments will have thick roots. And there's a lot of air that's stored in that thick root and it's less likely to rot. And also plants that come from dry environments have thick roots because they store a lot of water and it's less exposed surface area. Like a taproot, like a carrot, for example, there's not as much surface area for the plant to lose water. So yeah, there's a lot of neat characteristics there. That's the fun thing about learning about plants.
It's true. It could be well, it has been for you a lifelong study, and it's endlessly interesting, I find.
It is.
And you know so much, Egan.
Oh, I don't know.
It's
I
wonderful.
I observe a lot. I tell you, and it never gets old. It never gets old, isn't it? Isn't that the case, Karen? I mean, you're
Yeah.
similar. I mean, you've loved plants for a long time, and it just is continually compelling and always interesting.
Yeah, there's
And
always
I think,
something.
yeah,
Yeah, there's always something I learn that is fascinating or blows my little mind, and
yeah,
I never get tired of um, learning more about plants.
yeah. No, it's true.
Um,
Yeah,
is there anything else that you wanted to touch on today that we haven't talked about yet? Just
yeah,
checking in.
yeah. You know what? One quick thing is that we have to change the way we do things. What worked in the let's just say what worked in the 20th century. There's no sense of any end to the amount of resources that we have, and a lot of the techniques in landscape and horticulture that worked then. Um, just in terms of resources, are not going to work in the future. Also, things like planting trees was a lot easier in this region because we would have typically a very wet spring and early summer, and that may have been the case this year, but over the last 10 years we've had very dry. It's drier and hotter for a longer period of time, and we're finding that the way we used to do things just doesn't work as well as it used to. And another example is this whole concept of fertilizing and watering and providing all this to plants. It actually creates a maintenance issue. So the more water you use, the more nutrient, and nutrient come from fertilizer, but water releases nutrient too. Plants grow lush and soft, and they become more susceptible to heat, and more susceptible to other stressors. And guess what else happens when you use a lot of water? Weeds. You get way more weed growth. And Richmond, we're looking at some traffic circles, and we're looking at planting these traffic circles without irrigation, and using plants that can thrive in those environments. And one of the concepts is less water, less weeds, right? So I guess the thing is, it's like what we have done in the past is not working as well as it used to. So we have to do things differently. We have to. And the fun opportunity here is we can all work together to be innovative, to try to understand new ways of doing things and new ways of reimagining what our expectations are. And that's an exciting thing, I think, to be here at this time, to try to embrace natural systems and understand plants better. And I think the more you understand plants, the less difficult it is, i.e., the less inputs, the less water you have to use. So
that ties in really well with a comment that we're getting from someone who's listening in, saying that they just reclaimed a lot of yarrow from a nearby development site and planted it in their lawn. So there's
awesome.
someone they're making a positive change. They're trying something different.
Yeah.
I guess it's important to stay curious and to try things. And not to just think, well, it's all helpless. I'm going to just cover my lawn with rock mulch or mulch and just avoid the issue altogether. Right? There's solutions out there. You just need to get connected with people like Egan, who's got good ideas and passion. Thank you so much for joining us today, Egan. It's a pleasure to have you here again. Thank you for everyone who tuned in today. Thanks for sharing your time with us and learning a bit more about sustainable gardening practices. We will see you for our final segment of 2024, which will be on October 24th. And we will be talking about how to take care of your fall harvest. So we'll be seeing you next time, when hopefully all of your hard work in the summer will have paid off and you'll have some great food that you've grown to enjoy. So until then, I hope you enjoy the summer weather, and I hope that you enjoy some time outside in your garden.